The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I'll call the member for Aston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This year, students went back to university to discover that a condition of them continuing their studies was a compulsory student services and amenities fee of up to $263. They didn't have to pay that fee last year because it was voluntary, as it was for the previous 6 years before that. This is the only fee, Madam Deputy Speaker, that students must pay up front, and they are forced to pay it if they want to continue and complete their university degree. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a disgrace. It should be immediately removed, and this bill, which perpetuates this, should be rejected. Madam Deputy Speaker, this issue which we are debating in this bill, which in essence is whether or not students should be forced to pay a compulsory student services fee and a student representation fee, has been a battle that has been waged now for almost 2 decades. For 2 decades, we on this side of the chamber have been arguing passionately that students should have the right and should have the responsibility to choose for themselves whether or not they want to pay for certain amenities, services and representation on campus. On the other hand, for 2 decades, the Labor Party on the other side of the chamber has been arguing vigorously that students must not have that choice, but must be compelled to pay an upfront fee as a condition of them doing their studies. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill before us perpetuates Labor's desire to cement compulsory student unionism into the university landscape across Australia. And not only that, but it guarantees that fees can not only be up to $250, but can now be up to $263. And that's actually the particular provision in this bill. And in some respects, this bill gives an indication of the priorities of this government. I mean, here we are, we have thousands of jobs being lost on a daily basis or a weekly basis. We have underemployment at a 10-year high. We have the boats which continue to arrive on a weekly basis. We have the immigration system in tatters. We have preschools closing, and we have childcare fees skyrocketing and becoming unaffordable. But this government, it doesn't address those things. It comes in here and uses a full morning of Parliament to make a measure so that the compulsory fees cannot be $250, but can be $263. So important was that extra $13 that they want to get out of every single university student across the country that this becomes the priority of this Parliament for the morning of today's session. Madam Deputy Speaker, apparently jobs can wait, apparently cost of living pressures can wait, apparently the boats can keep arriving, but geez, we've got to get that $13 out of those students. That can't wait another 12 months for that to automatically come into being, that $13 per student, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are so opposed to compulsory student unionism for the simple reason that we believe that students themselves should have the choice as to whether or not they want to pay for the students' fees, for the student services and for student representation. It's a pretty simple proposition, this, Madam Deputy Speaker. I mean, university students are all adults. They're all above 18 years of age. They all have the maturity and the wisdom to decide for themselves which university to go to, the maturity and wisdom to decide for themselves what courses they want to study, and the maturity and wisdom to decide for themselves how hard they want to study, whether they want to study at all, because they're adults and they have that right and they have that responsibility. But the Labor Party and this Labor government are happy for them to have those choices, but no, they're not allowed to have the choice as to whether or not to pay for an event which is being held on campus. They don't have the right to determine whether or not they want to subsidise the catering, which they may not use. They have no right and they don't have the capacity and responsibility, apparently, to determine whether or not they want any form of representation on campus. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is insulting to the 1.5 million students who attend tertiary institutions. We firmly believe on this side of the House, and is the reason why we are so stridently against compulsory student unionism because we firmly believe that students should have that choice. They should be able to decide for themselves what they want to spend their money on, Madam Deputy Speaker. This principle, of course, is so important in the context of the changing demographics at our universities. And the member for Paradise beforehand, Madam Deputy Speaker, said that he made the point that students these days, they're working hard, many are part-time, and so they're not hanging around on campus as they may have done 20 or 30 years ago. Nearly all students these days have part-time jobs to get them through university. Of course, we know that 130,000 students are external students and so never set foot on a university campus. They never even have the opportunity to avail themselves of the services and the amenities which this compulsory levy would provide. But they also have to pay an upfront fee, Madam Deputy Speaker. How does that work? You don't step foot on the campus because you're studying externally, and yet the government forces these students to have to pay a compulsory service and levy fee for services which they will never get to benefit from. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government needs to answer these fundamental questions because it goes to the heart of this bill and goes to the heart of compulsory student unionism, which this government reintroduced after 6 years of it being voluntary, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, like the member for Townsville, here I have also had many people make representations to me, dozens of students who have been outraged at the fact that they have to pay a compulsory fee when they do not use those services. And let me just read out the comments from two or three such people. David Jancic, for example, who lives in Ferntree Gully in my electorate, and he writes, "I have to pay an extra $263 per year this year." He attends Monash University. He writes, "Basic car parking permit last year was $360, justified due to a lack of student amenities fees. Yet this year, with the amenities fees, the parking permit is still $360. Apart from parking, I've never used union services and now have to pay $263 for nothing." Stephen, who is from Rowville, he writes that my daughter went berserk when she got her amenities and services fee. She doesn't use the services and she is doing honours and only needs to be at uni for a few weeks this year and had to pay a full semester in amenities fees. She is very unhappy. Frankie, another student from my electorate, says $55 per trimester, and as a part-time postgrad student, I will be using zero of these services as the majority of my tuition is online or out of standard business hours, i.e. when they're closed. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people who are in exactly this same position, where they're barely on the university campus, or they are only on the university campus to attend their tutorials or their lectures, and then they go home to attend their children or to study or to attend sporting clubs elsewhere. And yet this government is forcing them to pay upfront fees for services which they do not want. Madam Deputy Speaker, often the argument in favour of a compulsory fee is that it pays for essential services which more needy students need to be able to complete their university degrees. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't deny the fact that some essential services are necessary, but I put to you that those essential services which students need and younger people generally need, and particularly those who are more disadvantaged, is not the services provided by the university campuses, but often the services which are provided by the government or by NGOs. It is Centrelink, for example. It is legal aid. It might be Lifeline. It might be the Salvos if they're in particular financial trouble, or Anglicare. These are services, Madam Deputy Speaker, that exist already. They're already paid for by the taxpayer. They're already funded by the government, or they're already funded through the donations collected by people like the Salvation Army or by Anglicare. So I think that argument, which is frequently put forward, is a furphy, Madam Deputy Speaker. The second argument which is often put is that these amenities and services fees are only for particular services and don't go at all to paying for political representation on campus. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that the legislation itself expressly says that. I know that the regulations say that the money which is collected on a compulsory basis cannot be used for political representation. But we know on this side of the House that this is exceptionally hard to police, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know that inevitably some of the funds leak over into political representation so that it not only becomes a compulsory fee for services, but it in essence becomes compulsory unionism, something which we very, very firmly reject, Madam Deputy Speaker, Mr Deputy Speaker. The final point I would make in relation to this bill and in relation to the issue of compulsory student unionism is this simple point. When you have services which are run by individuals or run by businesses or companies that have to deliver to their customers in order to attract revenue, then those services will be much more responsive to the needs of their customers than what a service would be if it was guaranteed its funding through a compulsory levy. That's a very simple proposition, and it goes to the heart of what we believe on this side of the House in terms of fundamental liberal economics and the fundamental value of the free market. You get more responsiveness to students or to any other customers when a free market is at play, when businesses have to compete, when they have to deeply understand what the students want and what they need and to tailor their services accordingly. You get far better responsiveness, far better tailoring to what students actually want and need than you do if those businesses or those universities simply are given a bucket of money because that bucket of money has been collected on a compulsory basis. And then those services can become lazy and less responsive to student demand over time. Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill is an important one. And it's important not just because of the issues which we have been discussing today and what this bill entails in regards to perpetuating compulsory student unionism, but it's also important because it stands as a clear illustration of the stark philosophical divide between the coalition on this side of the House and the Labor Party on the other side of the House. We, very much on this side of the House, we favour freedom of choice, Mr Deputy Speaker. We favour very strongly individual responsibility. We favour very strongly the free market delivering better outcomes to customers, better outcomes to students. They're our core philosophical beliefs, Mr Deputy Speaker, and they are represented by our advocacy against student unionism, compulsory student unionism. Whereas on the other side of the House, the contrast is that they favour compulsion and they have an innate mistrust of the market delivering for people. And they don't favour giving individual responsibilities and individual dignity for students to be able to have choice of their own. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is an important bill. It's an important bill to be debated, but it is one that should be very, very firmly rejected. And when we get back into government, hopefully at the next election, we will be once again abolishing compulsory student unionism.